the budget is out. There wasn't too much on energy or electricity, but then again there are separate ministries that deal with this. So one has to be cautious on what one can expect from the finance ministry. Even though there wasn't too much, there were some ambitious things that would actually have long-term effects. Many things are actually linked. If we talk about a wish list, whether it's for energy, GST is obviously on many people's mind, but even if you take banking sector and financing the banking sector, a lot of the stressed assets or so-called NPAs, non-performing assets, they're actually linked to electricity, whether it's power plants or the state utilities, the discoms. Then there was a mention by the finance minister that they may look at tweaking FRBM, which is also of relevance because of the UDAY scheme and how UDAY may eventually play into state finances and deficits. So a lot of things are linked. Similarly, even though electricity or energy wasn't the focus, when you talk about building new roads, new infrastructure, agricultural growth, rural growth, all of these have very big implications for energy and electricity requirements. In some ways, this has been called by some people a common sense budget. This is doing many things that should be done. Did it have any magical game changer? Not really, but I think executing what's already being done today is very important as opposed to just coming up with new things that need to be done. Some of the long-term mentionings was development of inland waterways, which will be very efficient. If you consider railways as being more efficient for freight than roads, well, waterways are even more efficient than railways, but yet they're underdeveloped in India. So that is a very positive thing. Similarly, if you think of the rail budget, not the Indian budget, but the railways budget, that talked about dedicated freight corridors. Now these will take 5 to 10 years to build out, but these would make it more competitive to use more and more rail freight, which will take time but will help not only the GDP, but energy efficiency. One of the mentions was 100% village electrification. Now this is very good news. It needs to be done, but one needs a little bit of understanding on what it actually gives you. Mentioned was that when the government came in, there were roughly 18,000 villages, a little more, that weren't electrified. This is on a base of some 600,000 villages across India. Therefore, it was a few percent that still needed to be electrified. But this is only at the village level. It doesn't speak at the household level. That's really the next frontier. So while this is a necessary ingredient, it's not sufficient. So now the next step should be household electrification, and more than just a wire to the home. We've done studies at Brookings, India, talking about service and quality and making sure people are not load shed. When we look at energy and electricity overall, there were 3-4 domains that were talked about. Renewable energies was given a little bit of emphasis, but not with new targets or new money, but just re-emphasizing the 175,000 megawatts of renewable energy that are planned for India. In addition, the coal cess was upped from 200 rupees per ton to 400 rupees per ton. You could consider this a carbon tax, but even then it's only in the order of $5 a ton for carbon, which is not very high. But at the same time, it's a measurable step towards creating funding that could be used for clean energy. Now, there is not yet enough clarity in how this very large quantum of money will get spent or utilized. That still needs some working out. In the oil and gas front, there were talks about encouraging exploration, especially risky exploration, by allowing market rates to be used for such sales. These are good steps, but again will take some time to work out. Converting the licensing or taxation for oil, for example, from a fixed rate to a percentage base ad valorem is a good step, but then that number matters, because when oil prices are low, that's a very low amount. But if oil prices rise, then it could become a much higher share than today's fixed number. The last thing that got some mention was nuclear power, which was said that we will invest both budgetary support as well as public sector support to really grow over the next 15 to 20 years. So useful for energy security, useful for India's energy needs, but not in this structure going to change things in the next 5 years or even 10 years necessarily. Now, if you look at all of these energy options discussed, almost everything spoken about was supply side. So while there was a good emphasis that certainly India needs more supply, It was disappointing that other than LED bulbs, very little on the consumption side, efficiency side, got much mention. If you talk about what else was talked about in energy, many things were tweaked. For example, duty rates at components that go into windmills or solar panels or pump sets which consume energy. So these may make certain things cheaper that should be done, but at the same time, maybe next time or eventually we will have a mechanism that says, not only will I change the taxation or the duty structure, but I will incentivize more efficient products. So instead of saying I will tax a car, so there were some cesses discussed for automobiles, maybe we can envision where if you have a very efficient car, it'll have a lower taxation rate. Actually, that was done. So clean vehicles, hybrid electric vehicles, they were actually exempt from some of these cesses. But I think this strategy can be expanded and taken much further. Hybrid and electric vehicles, I think, are another medium to long-term evolution that may happen. The support mechanism was that these would be waived off the cess, so now there would be a greater differential between normal vehicles and these. Plus, there are additional support mechanisms. For example, Ministry of Heavy Industries has a electric vehicle e-mobility program. So combining that 1 lakh that's available through some schemes with this differential could actually get you to the point where these become viable for the public, if not immediately, but very soon. So are we there yet? Are these being made in India yet? No, but this could take off very, very soon. Another reason why these are important electric vehicles is because of co-benefits. From a carbon perspective, because India is coal heavy, electricity doesn't change much compared to liquid fuel, oil. But by moving to hybrid or electric vehicles, you reduce local air pollution, which is a very big positive and a driver for India. There were a few other areas that were indirectly linked to energy. Irrigation was given strong support. Irrigation is a big consumer of energy, irrigation pump sets. So if canals are built, this could release some of the pressure on the electricity side. And of course, growth of the rural sector. Electrification is needed for cold storage supply chain, which is a very big need for Indian agricultural development. LPG subsidies have already started moving towards direct benefit transfers. Using this model, there is a proposal to now start with a pilot of giving direct transfers for fertilizer. So this is a welcome step. Eventually this could be expanded to giving DBT benefits for agricultural pump sets or agricultural electricity consumption. Why is this important? Everybody talks about leakage as a driver. There's an even more compelling reason. Today, the farmer pays very little for the electricity, so they buy a very cheap pump set, an inefficient pump set. Now, if they have to pay for electricity, but are given a cash or a transfer subsidy, then they would have an incentive to buy a more efficient pump set, and this would also help water table falls and look at water in a much more holistic manner, which is very important for sustainability over the next 5-10 years. In summary, this was a very solid type of a budget. It didn't necessarily have game changers. So were people elated at surprises? There weren't too many surprises, but there were positive steps of what needs to be done. And if the government is able to actually execute the ongoing programs, whether on electrification, 24/7 power, renewables, and so forth, then one would move from being just satisfied to very satisfied or even elated.